Bullies ripped her dress at the dance. She left with his nose broken. The fluorescent lights of Jefferson High School cast harsh shadows across the crowded hallway as Kira Montrose navigated through clusters of students with practiced invisibility. Her dark hair fell like a curtain around her angular face, and her slight frame seemed to shrink further into the oversized sweater that had become her daily armor. 3 months into her junior year at this sprawling suburban school in Denver, she had perfected the art of moving unnoticed, keeping her hazel eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum tiles beneath her worn sneakers. Kira had transferred from a small private school across town after her mother's job relocation, leaving behind the familiar comfort of a place where everyone knew her quiet nature wasn't weakness, but simply her way of being. Here at Jefferson, with its 3,000 students and maze-like corridors, she was just another face in the crowd, exactly how she preferred it. What her new classmates didn't know was that beneath her unassuming exterior lay years of disciplined training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a skill she'd developed religiously at her uncle's dojo back in her old neighborhood. The commute was now too far for regular classes, but muscle memory and technique don't simply fade away. The trouble began on a Tuesday morning in the main courtyard, where students gathered before first period beneath the towering oak trees that gave the school its mascot name, the Mighty Oaks. Kira had found a quiet spot near the science building steps, pulling out her worn copy of The Outsiders for some peaceful reading before the day officially began. She barely noticed the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her page. Well, what do we have here? The voice belonged to Bradley Henshaw, whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. At 6 feet tall, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confident swagger that comes from being the star quarterback, Bradley commanded attention wherever he walked. His Letterman jacket bore patches from 3 different sports, and his easy smile masked a cruel streak that most teachers never witnessed. Reading during social time? That's not very social of you, transfer girl. Kira looked up briefly, meeting his ice blue eyes for just a moment before returning her attention to her book. I'm fine, thanks, she murmured, hoping her disinterest would send him away. Instead, Bradley stepped closer, and she became aware of his 2 constant companions flanking him like bodyguards. To his left stood Marcus Webb, a stocky wrestler whose thick neck and perpetual scowl made him look older than his years. Marcus rarely spoke, preferring to let his intimidating presence do the talking. On Bradley's right was Tyler Nash, tall and lanky with nervous energy that manifested in constant fidgeting and an eagerness to please his leader that bordered on desperation. Together, they formed Jefferson High's unofficial ruling class, the kind of trio that made other students instinctively step aside in the hallways. Did you hear that, guys? Bradley's voice carried enough volume to attract the attention of nearby students. She's fine, just fine, sitting all alone with her little book. He reached down and plucked the paperback from Kira's hands, holding it up like evidence in a trial. The Outsiders, huh? How fitting. You definitely qualify as an outsider here. Kira felt her face flush as she stood up, extending her hand toward her book. Could I have that back, please? Her voice remained steady despite the growing audience of onlookers, students who had begun to form a loose circle around the unfolding drama. Bradley held the book just out of her reach, his grin widening. Maybe if you ask nicely, say pretty please, transfer girl. When Kira remained silent, he tossed the book to Marcus, who caught it with a theatrical flourish. Looks like someone needs to learn some manners. The bell rang, saving Kira from further humiliation as the crowd dispersed toward their first period classes. Marcus tossed her book to the ground before following Bradley away, leaving Kira to retrieve her novel from the courtyard pavement. She noticed several students looking back at her with expressions ranging from sympathy to amusement, but no one stopped to help or speak up. This was how it always worked. Everyone minded their own business until someone else became the target. Over the following weeks, the encounters escalated with calculated precision. Bradley seemed to have an uncanny ability to appear wherever Kira was most vulnerable. In the cafeteria, he would bump into her table just as she was about to take a bite, sending her sandwich tumbling to the floor. "Oops, sorry about that, clumsy," he would say with mock concern, while his friends snickered behind him. "You should really watch where you're putting your food." The chemistry lab became another battleground. During a particularly complex experiment involving volatile compounds, Bradley managed to accidentally knock over Kira's beaker, sending her carefully measured solution cascading across the black lab bench. "My bad," he announced loudly enough for the entire class to hear. "I guess some people just can't handle the pressure of real science." Mrs. Henderson, the chemistry teacher, barely looked up from her desk. "Clean it up and start over, Miss Montrose. You'll need to stay after class to finish the assignment." The injustice of it stung more than the ruined experiment, but Kira knew better than to protest. Speaking up would only make things worse. The gymnasium proved to be the worst venue for Bradley's campaign of harassment. During mandatory physical education classes, he would position himself strategically during volleyball games, spiking the ball directly at Kira's head with enough force to send her stumbling backward. "Sorry, didn't see you there," he would call out while the other students laughed. "Maybe try jumping next time." What made the situation particularly painful was how skillfully Bradley operated. He never crossed the line into obvious bullying that would draw teacher intervention, instead maintaining a facade of accidental clumsiness and backhanded apologies. To any adult observer, he appeared to be a popular athletic student who simply had unfortunate luck being around the quiet transfer girl when minor accidents occurred. Kira endured it all with stoic silence, her jaw clenched tight as she cleaned up spilled food, redid ruined assignments, and nursed bruises from accidental collisions. Inside, she felt the familiar rhythm of combat breathing that her uncle had taught her, deep inhalation, controlled exhalation, centering her mind and body. She could end this nonsense in 30 seconds if she chose to, but her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Violence is always the last resort, Kira. There are better ways to solve problems." More importantly, she remembered her uncle's most crucial lesson. True strength isn't about winning fights. It's about knowing when not to fight at all. She had worked too hard to build her skills to waste them on someone like Bradley Henshaw. Besides, her academic scholarship depended on maintaining a spotless disciplinary record, and she couldn't risk jeopardizing her future over a few months of teenage drama. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in late October when the entire school was buzzing with excitement about the upcoming Halloween dance. Kira had no intention of attending, but she found herself curious about the decorations as she passed through the main hallway toward her locker. Orange and black streamers hung from the ceiling, and carved pumpkins lined the windowsills, creating a festive atmosphere that felt foreign to her current reality. As she reached her locker, she discovered a folded piece of paper that had been slipped through the ventilation slots. Her name was written on the outside in unfamiliar handwriting, and her heart skipped unexpectedly as she opened it. The note was brief but genuine. "I've been watching what's happening to you, and I think you're handling it with incredible grace. Would you like to go to the dance with me? David Chen." David Chen was someone she recognized from her advanced placement English class, a thoughtful student with kind eyes and a gentle manner who always contributed insightful comments during discussions. He wasn't part of any particular social group, but he carried himself with quiet confidence that Kira found appealing. The fact that he had noticed her situation and still wanted to spend time with her felt like a small miracle. She found him after school near the bike racks, where he was unlocking a well-maintained mountain bike. "David," she called softly, and he turned with a smile that made her stomach flutter in a way she hadn't experienced before. "You got my note," he said, and she noticed a slight nervousness in his voice that made him even more endearing. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to go to something like that." "I'd love to," Kira replied, surprising herself with her enthusiasm. "I was planning to skip it, but now I'm actually looking forward to it." They made plans to meet at the dance, and for the first time in months, Kira felt genuinely excited about something happening at Jefferson High. She spent the weekend helping her mother pick out a dress, settling on a simple but elegant navy blue number that made her feel more confident than she had in months. The Halloween dance was held in the school's main gymnasium, which had been transformed with dramatic lighting and elaborate decorations. Students arrived in costumes ranging from creative to silly, and the energy was infectious. Kira had chosen to dress as a classic movie star, with her hair styled in vintage waves and red lipstick that made her feel glamorous and sophisticated. David met her at the entrance, dressed as a 1950s gentleman with suspenders and a bow tie that perfectly complemented her vintage look. "You look amazing," he said, offering his arm with old-fashioned gallantry. "Ready to show these people how real dancing is done?" For the first 2 hours, the evening was perfect. They danced to both fast songs and slow ballads, talked about books and movies, and discovered they shared a love of classic films and obscure music. Kira found herself laughing more than she had in months, and she noticed other students watching them with friendly curiosity rather than the usual dismissive indifference. "I'm getting us some punch," David announced during a brief break between songs. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back." Kira nodded, still smiling as she watched him navigate through the crowd toward the refreshment table. She was adjusting her dress when she felt a familiar presence behind her, and her stomach dropped as she recognized Bradley's voice. "Well, well, look who decided to join the party," he said, his words slightly slurred. She could smell alcohol on his breath, probably from whatever he'd been drinking in the parking lot before the dance. "And with David Chen, no less. I didn't know charity cases were his type." Kira turned to face him, keeping her expression neutral despite the way her heart was racing. "I'm just here to have a good time, Bradley. Please leave me alone." "Oh, she speaks," Bradley announced to his friends, who had materialized on either side of him like always. "And she's got some attitude tonight. I like that. It's an improvement." He stepped closer, and Kira could see his pupils were dilated, his usual calculated cruelty replaced by something more unpredictable and dangerous. "Where's your boyfriend?" Marcus asked, scanning the crowd with obvious malicious intent. "Did he abandon you already?" "He's getting punch," Kira replied, taking a step backward and finding herself against the wall. "He'll be back any minute." "Perfect," Bradley said, his grin taking on a predatory quality. "That gives us time to have a proper conversation about your attitude problem." What happened next occurred with devastating swiftness. Bradley reached out and grabbed a handful of Kira's dress at the shoulder, his grip tight enough to leave marks. "You know what your problem is, transfer girl? You think you're better than everyone else, walking around with your nose in the air, acting like you're too good to talk to people." "Let go of me," Kira said, her voice low and dangerous in a way that should have warned him to stop. But Bradley was too drunk and too committed to his performance to recognize the threat. "Or what?" he taunted, tightening his grip. "What are you going to do about it?" He yanked harder, and Kira heard the sickening sound of fabric tearing. The shoulder of her dress ripped away completely, leaving her partially exposed in front of half the student body. The music seemed to stop, though she knew it was probably still playing, and she was dimly aware of gasps and murmurs from the crowd that had gathered to watch. "Oops," Bradley said with mock innocence. "Looks like your dress wasn't as classy as you thought." That's when something inside Kira snapped. Not the explosive anger she might have expected, but something cold and calculating that her uncle would have recognized immediately. Her breathing became controlled, her stance shifted imperceptibly, and her eyes focused with laser intensity on the threat in front of her. "You made a mistake," she said quietly, and there was something in her tone that made Tyler take an involuntary step backward. Bradley, however, was too intoxicated to read the warning signs. "What did you just say to me?" "I said you made a mistake," Kira repeated, and this time her voice carried clearly through the gymnasium. "You should have walked away." She moved with fluid precision, her body remembering years of training even as her mind remained crystal clear. Her left hand shot out in a perfect palm strike, catching Bradley square in the solar plexus and driving the air from his lungs. As he doubled over, gasping, she grabbed his wrist and twisted, using his own momentum to send him crashing to the floor in a textbook judo throw. Marcus lunged forward, but Kira was already moving, her training taking over completely. She sidestepped his clumsy attack and swept his legs, sending him tumbling into Tyler, who had been trying to circle around behind her. Both boys went down in a tangle of limbs and confused shouts. Bradley struggled to his feet, his face red with rage and embarrassment. "You little—" he started, but Kira was already there, her hand gripping his shirt as she pivoted and threw him again, this time with enough force to send him sliding across the polished gymnasium floor. The crowd was completely silent now, students pressing backward to give them space, while teachers finally began pushing through the crowd toward the confrontation. But Kira wasn't finished yet. She walked calmly to where Bradley was trying to get up, his movements slow and uncoordinated. When he finally made it to his feet, she was waiting for him, her stance relaxed but ready. "You want to know what my problem is?" she asked, her voice carrying to every corner of the gymnasium. "My problem is bullies, who think they can do whatever they want to people who won't fight back." Bradley swung wildly, a clumsy haymaker that Kira avoided easily. She caught his arm, used his own momentum against him, and sent him face first into the decorated wall. When he bounced back, his nose was bleeding, and his perfect quarterback confidence had been replaced by something very close to fear. "You're crazy," he gasped, holding his nose as blood dripped onto his costume. "You're actually crazy." "No," Kira said calmly. "I'm just done." She could have ended it there, could have walked away and let the teachers handle the aftermath. But Bradley's humiliation had transformed into rage, and he pulled something from his pocket. A small knife, probably something he'd brought for his costume, but was now wielding with genuine menace. "You think you're tough?" he snarled, advancing on her with the blade held low. "Let's see how tough you really are." The gymnasium erupted in screams and shouts as students scattered, but Kira remained perfectly still, her eyes locked on the weapon in Bradley's hand. She had trained for this scenario dozens of times, had practiced disarming techniques until they were second nature. But more importantly, she could see the fear behind Bradley's bravado, the way his hand shook as he gripped the knife. "Put it down, Bradley," she said quietly. "This is over. You've lost. Don't make it worse." But pride and alcohol had made Bradley reckless beyond reason. He lunged forward with the knife, and Kira moved like water, flowing around his attack and striking his wrist with surgical precision. The knife clattered across the floor as Bradley screamed, clutching his arm to his chest. She could have broken his wrist easily, could have done permanent damage to pay him back for months of humiliation. Instead, she had used just enough force to neutralize the threat, leaving him hurt but not crippled. As he knelt on the floor, cradling his injured arm, she stood over him with complete composure. "It's over," she said simply. "Stay down." By then, teachers and security guards had finally reached them, but the confrontation was already finished. Bradley remained on the floor, his nose still bleeding and his wrist beginning to swell. Marcus and Tyler had disappeared into the crowd, apparently having no interest in facing Kira's skills themselves. David appeared at her side, his face pale, but his eyes filled with admiration. "Are you okay?" he asked, and his genuine concern made her realize that she was, in fact, perfectly fine. Better than fine, actually. "I'm great," she said, and meant it. But I think I need to find something to wear home. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Security cameras had captured the entire incident, clearly showing Bradley's escalation from harassment to assault to bringing a weapon into the situation. While Kira received a brief suspension pending investigation, Bradley faced expulsion and potential criminal charges. The knife, it turned out, violated not just school policy but state law regarding weapons on school property. More importantly, the social dynamics at Jefferson High shifted overnight. Students who had watched Kira endure months of bullying with quiet dignity now saw her in an entirely different light. The girl who had seemed like an easy target had revealed herself to be someone capable of defending herself with skill and restraint. "I can't believe you just stood there and took it for so long," said Jessica Martinez, a girl from Kira's chemistry class who had never spoken to her before. "If I could fight like that, I would have ended it on day one." "Fighting should always be the last resort," Kira replied, unconsciously echoing her uncle's teachings. "But sometimes it's necessary." The story spread through the school with the speed of social media, growing and changing with each telling. Some versions had Kira defeating a dozen attackers, others focused on her restraint in not seriously injuring Bradley when she clearly could have. What remained consistent was the respect she had earned from her classmates. David found her at lunch the following Monday, sliding into the seat across from her with a shy smile. "So," he said, "how was your weekend?" "Quiet," Kira replied, returning his smile. "I spent some time with my uncle, telling him about what happened. He was proud of me for handling it the way I did." "You mean the fighting?" "No," Kira said. "For waiting as long as I did. For trying every other option first. For not becoming like them when I finally had to act." David nodded thoughtfully. "That's what made it so impressive. You could have hurt him badly, but you didn't. You just stopped him." Over the following weeks, Kira found herself in an entirely new social position at Jefferson High. Students who had previously ignored her now nodded respectfully in the hallways. Teachers who had seemed oblivious to the bullying now went out of their way to check on her well-being. Even some of the popular kids made efforts to include her in conversations and group activities. The most significant change, however, was in Bradley himself. His broken nose had healed crookedly, giving him a permanent reminder of their encounter, but the real damage was to his reputation. The video of their fight had circulated widely, and seeing their invincible quarterback defeated by a quiet transfer student had shattered his mystique completely. When they passed each other in the hallway 3 weeks later, Bradley actually stepped aside to let her pass. "Kira," he said quietly, and she stopped, surprised to hear him use her actual name instead of his usual mocking nicknames. "What is it, Bradley?" He looked uncomfortable, his usual arrogance replaced by something that might have been genuine remorse. I've been thinking about what happened, about what I did." He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "I'm sorry. I was out of line, and I'm sorry." Kira studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity or manipulation. Instead, she saw something she hadn't expected: humility. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "But actions have consequences, Bradley. Remember that." He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I will." As she walked away, Kira reflected on how completely her world had changed. She had come to Jefferson High hoping to blend in and avoid trouble, but sometimes trouble finds you regardless of your intentions. The difference was that she had chosen to face it on her own terms, using her skills not for revenge, but for justice. The Halloween dance had been ruined, but David had asked her to the winter formal, and she was looking forward to it. This time she knew there would be no unwelcome interruptions. She had earned her place at Jefferson High through strength, restraint, and the courage to stand up for herself when it mattered most. Most importantly, she had learned that true power isn't about dominating others, It's about protecting yourself and those you care about, while never losing sight of who you want to be. Bradley Henshaw had tried to break her spirit, but instead he had helped her discover just how strong she really was.